My name's Silverlock, and today I'll be attempting a hardcore Nuzlocke of Pokemon Sun using only Pokemon found through Island Scan. The 7th generation of games, starting with Sun and Moon, introduced the QR scanner function, which lets you use the 3DS camera to scan special QR codes to add Pokemon to your Pokedex. After scanning enough codes, you would then be able to use the Island Scan feature, which causes a special Pokemon to appear in certain areas, and which Pokemon appears depends on the day of the week and which island you're currently on. The Pokemon that are found this way are notable for a couple things. First, they're not officially included in the Sun and Moon Pokedex, and second, most of them will come knowing a specific move they can only get through breeding. With all that in mind, I figured it would be fun to take on the Island Challenge of Alola using this unique set of Pokemon. And when you include the 2-on-1 fights, and the trainers with Pokemon that are actually Eevee trained, I could see this being a potentially difficult but rewarding experience. So as a reminder, in addition to the typical Nuzlocke rules, I have to play on set mode, I won't be allowed to use healing items in battle, and there will be level caps in place based on the level of a boss trainer's ace. So with all of that out of the way, let's start the run. We begin first by picking our starter, which we obviously won't be using, but it does have some important implications for the start of the run, which I'll explain in a bit. I go ahead and pick Litten, so our rival Hal would pick Rowlet. And once we get through the myriad of tutorials, we can finally find our first encounter in the grass in Kahuna City. After scanning some QR codes on a Thursday, we can find a Clink who I name Asmodeus. Not exactly an exciting first encounter, and unlike the other ones we'll find, he doesn't come with an egg move. But Asmodeus is all we have for now, so I'll have to find a way to make him work. You would think that having a Steel type would be a defensive boon to us against Alima's normal types, and it is, but there are a number of things going against him. 1. Asmodeus came with a modest nature, which lowers his better attack stat in favor of his more mediocre special attack. 2. He doesn't know any Steel-type moves, so no stab. 3. He has to take on Alima's team of 2 all by himself. 4. Alima's Yungoos knows Pursuit, so it's able to hit Asmodeus for neutral damage. And 5. Even though he could take out Yungoos thanks to a held Silk Scarf powering up his Vice Grip, it still takes 4 hits just to bring it into the red, which forces Alima to use his potion, causing us to start all over again while giving Yungoos more opportunities to deal some damage. By the time Yungoos finally goes down after a few more Vice Grips, Asmodeus is left with just 7 HP. At this point, there is pretty much no way to get out of this. Smeargle comes in, then takes Asmodeus down on the next turn with a tackle. Just like that, our very first battle ends in a complete loss of the run. Under normal circumstances, after a total loss, you would have to completely start the game over. But since this is literally the first fight after literally catching our first encounter, I'd just go ahead and find myself a new Clink to save some time and spare us some more tutorials. My new Clink is aptly named Asmodeus version 2, and this time he comes with a sassy nature. It's a mixed blessing, trading less defense for more special defense, but the most important part is that his attack isn't hindered. With that in mind, I decide that we have to do a little Eevee training. It's not something I normally like to do, as it could be a little tedious and time consuming, but I don't have any other options to get past this early roadblock. So I head back to Route 1 to start fighting the low-leveled wild Pokemon to give out attack EVs, which will minimize the amount of experience to help cram as many EVs as possible before hitting the level cap. This means it will most likely be over the level cap by the time we reach the first island trial. The cap is 4, but getting past Alima to get to that point is much more important right now. And when we finally start attempt number 2, we immediately see the fruits of my labor. This time, instead of taking 4 hits to bring Yungoos into the red, it instead just takes 3. And even with the defense-lowering nature, Yungoos' Pursuit ends up doing about the same amount as it did before. That means that after Alima uses his potion, and a few more Vice Grips, Yungoos goes down, and Asmodeus V2 still has half of his HP left to deal with Smeargle. We still have a tight window to get through though. Smeargle opts to go for resisted tackles rather than a neutral hitting water gun, probably due to the earlier Leer from Yungoos lowering his defense. And even better, his Vice Grip ends up doing what looks like exactly half HP. It all comes down to this. Smeargle goes for another tackle, and he doesn't crit. Asmodeus survives, and with another Vice Grip, Smeargle goes down. The Eevee training was just enough to make it through on our second try. With that roadblock removed, we can finally press forward onto Route 2, where we can finally get our next viable encounter on a Friday, a Chikorita who I name Paimon. He comes with an extremely useful egg move, Leech Seed, which will be integral to surviving many fights in this game. Then in the Howley Cemetery on Saturdays, we can find a Litwick who I name Gremory. But as expected, Asmodeus ends up going a level over the cap by the time we reach the fight against the Totem Gumshoos, so it'll be up to our 2 newest team members to take it on their own. I start with Paimon setting up Leech Seed, as Gumshoos lowers his speed with a Scary Face, then calls its ally Yungoos. A Super Fang on the next turn activates Paimon's held Citrus Berry, then a Leer from Yungoos lowers his defense. A Razor Leaf doesn't do much, but when you include the Leech Seed damage and healing each turn, we're off to a decent start. On the next turn I go for Synthesis, anticipating at least one attack, but both of them just go for Leer again, lowering his defense even further. Paimon is back to full health, but is now at -3 defense, so he can't afford to stay in any longer. I have to switch to Gremory, and a super effective bite from Gumshoos does a large chunk of damage as she comes in. But after Yungoos expectedly whiffs of Tackle, a held Oranberry and Leech Seed bring Gremory back to nearly full health. But despite that, even I know that won't be enough for her to survive another turn. So I decide to switch right back to Paimon, but Yungoos ends up going for Pursuit. The extra damage from switching, along with it being super effective, means Gremory goes down in her first major battle. Her sacrifice does help Paimon come back in fresh, allowing him to go first with another Razor Leaf. It also forces Gumshoos and Yungoos to go for Scary Face and Leer respectively, but rather than attacking on the next turn, they get greedy and go for 2 more Leers. This lets Paimon connect with another Razor Leaf that takes out Yungoos, then leaves Gumshoos with barely a sliver after Leech Seed damage. But Paimon is back to -3 defense, meaning it comes down to this final turn. Gumshoos outspeeds and goes for Bite, and Paimon survives. He does get flinched, but one final turn of Leech Seed damage seals the deal, winning us our first island trial. It's a bummer to lose Gremory so soon, but her sacrifice was likely integral to getting through. And with that, we can finally round out the team by grabbing the other 2 JoJo starters. On Route 3 on a Sunday, I find a Cyndaquil who I name Byleth, then in the Seaward Cave on Monday, I can grab Barbatos the Totodile. Byleth quickly evolves into the Quilava at level 14 after another easy fight against Hau, and then just like that, we have our first grand trial against Hala and his fighting types. His Mankey starts with a Karate Chop, then Paimon sets up Leech Seed. A Razor Leaf the next turn brings it below half after Mankey sets up a Focus Energy, which of course leads to a critical hit Karate Chop on the following turn. But after healing with a Citrus Berry, Paimon ends up in decent shape after taking Mankey down with another Razor Leaf. Makuhita is next, and after a Fake Out Flinch, we go with the same Leech Seed strategy. An Arm Thrust hits 3 times to bring Paimon back below half, so I go for a Synthesis on the following turn to heal him back to full health. A second Arm Thrust ends up only hitting twice, which means Paimon is still near tip-top shape as Hala's Ace Crabrawler comes out last. It lets loose an all-out pummeling Z-move, leaving Paimon with just 9 HP. After surviving and planting one last Leech Seed, I switch to Barbatos, who gets hit by a strong power-up punch coming in. It then lowers his defense with Leer, and Brick Break from Barbatos sadly does very little damage. I go ahead and risk keeping Barbatos in, but Crabrawler just goes for a second Leer. Then again on the next turn. So instead of being punished, a couple Water Guns and Leech Seed damage eventually take Crabrawler down. I sometimes think I need to do a deep dive into the AI mechanics of these games, because it never ceases to amaze me how stubborn it can be. After winning our first grand trial, Paimon can evolve into Bayleaf, and then we're given our very own Tauros to ride, granting us access to 10 Carat Hill. Here's where we find our next encounter on a Tuesday, a dino who I name Murmur. But as cool as it is to have a pseudo-legendary this early in the game, it won't be fully evolved until way after the final level cap of the run. She'll still be useful early on, but those weird Unovan evolution requirements will continue to haunt us forever. With that, we're finally done with Melee Island, so now we're off to Akala Island. After Murmur single-handedly traumatizes a random French tourist, we can step over to Route 4 on a Thursday for our next encounter, a Vetipede who I named Bareth. His modest nature is a bit of a letdown, but he'll be sticking around thanks to his useful Bug-Poison type combo. And after yet another easy fight against Hau, Barbatos evolves into Croconaw, who manages to take Gladion's type Null down with some help from Asmodeus. Then after that, I take the opportunity to catch our Route 5 encounter on a Friday, a Bellsprout who I name Balam. Then on a Saturday, before we take on the next island trial in Brooklet Hill, we can find a Marill who I name Morax. He comes with the almost always preferred huge power ability, and he can immediately evolve into Azumarill, which is pretty convenient. But even with such a powerful addition to the team as a whole isn't quite stacked enough to take on the trial against Totem Wishiwashi. Except for Paimon, who again proves absolutely vital to making it through. It's all thanks to knowing Leech Seed, which, as we know from the previous island trial, effectively puts the Doom status effect on almost any opponent we come across. Wishiwashi opens by turning Paimon into a water type using Soak, then invites his little friend. After Paimon sets up a light screen on the next turn, it then starts going for Growl, which starts reducing the damage of Paimon's now stabless Razor Leaves. Paimon ends up activating Wishiwashi's health Citrus Berry after a couple more Razor Leaves, then a third finally takes down its ally. At this point, Paimon has been growled at 3 times, and now the physically bulky Alomomola joins the fight. Right now, Paimon isn't doing much damage, but he's been doing a great job at staying alive. But once Wishiwashi's health is low enough to take away its schooling form, and another Razor Leaf can't quite take it out, Alomomola can use Healing Pulse to bring it back above half health. And even after adding Leech Seed to Alomomola, continuing to keep Paimon in just extends the battle more than it needs to. It's probably because I kept hoping to get a critical hit at some point, but it never happens. So after a while, I finally get my head on straight and switch Paimon out for Asmodeus. A Helping Hand boosted Water Gun immediately brings him to about half, but the double Leech Seed healing continues to bail us out. Eventually, Wishiwashi is knocked out of its schooling form again, and after surviving 2 more Water Guns, a Charge Beam can finally take it down. He also gets the special attack boost along with it, which gives Asmodeus just enough power to take Alomomola out on the following turn, winning us a needlessly drawn out but relatively easy island trial. Afterwards, Balam can evolve into Weepinbell, but then on Route 6 on a Sunday, we can find ourselves a Gothita, who I named Vinaya. There it evolves into Whirlipede, and shortly after that, we're off to the 3rd Island Challenge against the Totem Salazzle. This time I have Barbatos take the lead, who gets immediately poisoned with Toxic. But thanks to the Water Z Crystal we just recently acquired, he can let loose a strong Hydro Vortex that just brings it below half. I was hoping for a bit more, but that's still a crucial amount of damage. Her Salandit Goon comes out, and after it torments Barbatos, I have him immediately take it down with a single Scald. She immediately calls another Salandit, making that turn a bit pointless. That, along with the accruing toxic damage, forces me to switch to Morax. It's a bit risky to bring him in with his fairy typing, but thankfully, he's just unaffected by a pointless Venom Drench and just gets taunted. So on the following turn, an Aqua Jet can take down the Totem Salazzle, and her stand soon follows thanks to an Aqua Tail. Another manageable totem battle results in another Z Crystal added to our collection. But our short streak of relatively easy totems will be coming to an end soon. But before we get to that, I go ahead and grab a few more encounters. I briefly return to Calais Bay to fish up a horsey who I named Fornius, then back on Route 7, I surf around in order to find a cute little Spheal who I named Floros. I then catch Osei the Luxio on Route 8, who unfortunately ends up joining with the Rivalry ability instead of the much more useful Intimidate. And on top of that, he ends up having a Bold Nature, which lowers his better attack stat. Not having Intimidate could potentially give us issues, especially considering that the next island trial has the fight against the Totem Lurantis. Since it's a grass type, my usual Leech Seed strategy won't work this time, and this thing hits like a truck. After some theory crafting, I determined that my only hope is to lead with Murmur. She manages to survive an opening X Scissor, giving her the opportunity to paralyze it with a Thunder Wave, just to give the rest of the team some wiggle room. And since Murmur will never be fully evolved due to the final level cap, I decide to let her go down in order to allow Balam to come in for free. Even though it's paralyzed, Lurantis can still outspeed thanks to its free speed boost at the start of the fight, but luckily for us, it gets fully paralyzed right away. But its ally Trumbeak manages to connect with a Supersonic after an Acid Spray does about a fourth. And after Lurantis fights through paralysis on the next turn to land an X Scissor, Balam ends up hitting himself in Confusion, letting Trumbeak deal the final blow with a Pluck. Just like that, we're already down 2 more team members, but their sacrifices may be enough to give Byleth a chance. All I can do is hope and pray that a Z-Crystal-powered Inferno Overdrive will be enough. But Lurantis manages to just barely hang on, only to get fully paralyzed. Holy crap. Trumbeak does manage to connect with another Supersonic to confuse Byleth, but since I truly do not have any other options, I keep him in. And like a boss, he fights through to connect with a Flame Wheel, taking down the Totem Lurantis before it can heal. This means I can switch to Osei to resist a couple plucks, then finish the fight with a single super effective Spark. Out of all the fights in the game, this is the one that scared me the most at first glance. Osei not having Intimidate meant there was no way for my team to do any kind of damage control, so in the end, it really had to come down to a couple sacrifices and a little luck to get through. With our hardest challenge so far done and done, we can finally move on to the fight against the Island Kahuna, Olivia. On the way there, while on the Akala outskirts on a Wednesday, I can find a Honedge who I name Citri. She joins the team with a usable Brave nature, but it won't be her taking on Olivia. I start with Paimon setting up Leech Seed against Nosepass, who immediately paralyzes him with a Thunder Wave. The damage from Rock Slide is made manageable thanks to a held Big Root increasing the amount of Leech Seed healing by 30%, which means Paimon is reasonably safe to fight on through Paralysis. He ends up connecting with a few Magical Leaves to force Olivia to use her Super Potion, then just a few turns later, Nosepass goes down. Next is Boldore, and I start the process again with another Leech Seed. Boldore's Headbutt ends up being a bit more powerful, so I have Paimon set up a Reflect to reduce the damage. After that, a couple more turns of Magical Leaves and Leech Seed knock down Boldore, leaving us Olivia's ace Lycanroc. It immediately goes for a Continental Crush, but thanks to the earlier Reflect, Paimon can easily survive, then heal nearly everything back with a Synthesis. But after getting fully paralyzed twice in a row, Lycanroc manages to land a couple Rock Throws, the second of which gets a critical hit. So Paimon has to come out after an impressive run. I switch to Morax, and all he has to do is tank a few Rock Throws, then finish the fight with a couple Aqua Jets, giving us our second Grand Trial victory. Determining the next level cap is a bit tricky. The next total Pokemon's level's at 29, but we have a battle against Mullane right before that, and his Ace Duck Trio is at level 30. What complicates it further is that after taking care of business at Aether Paradise, we're immediately thrown into a battle against Hau, whose ace is also at level 29. So I ultimately decide to use Mullane's ace as our official level cap, and while I'm not above a cap-induced challenge, having the cap at 30 does give me a bit of relief, as a few of my Pokemon can finally fully evolve at that level. It's also a relief because Hau's Alolan Raichu is a well-known problem. It's pretty strong at this stage of the game, and it's faster than my current roster. But with Barbatos being allowed to fully evolve, he becomes tanky enough to survive a Psychic, and can retaliate with a super effective Crunch, taking it down in a single hit. Nice. After that, I can grab a few more encounters, Malphus the Staravia on Route 10, Zagan the Vigoroth on Route 11, then Astaroth Axew on Mount Hokulani. And while Mullane is the one we're basing the level cap on, he's not too much of a challenge. Osei can knock down his Skarmory with just a couple Sparks, Morax can take Dugtrio out with a single Aqua Tail, and after another does about half to Metang, Byleth can come in and finish it off with just a couple Flame Wheels. Naturally, it's the next island trial against Totem Vikavolt that will be the greater challenge. As usual, I lead with Paimon doing what he does best by setting up Leech Seed, and he just barely survives a super effective Bug Bite before Vikavolt summons his spare 9-volt battery. I switch to Bareth, who takes some damage and gets paralyzed by a Thunder Wave coming in, but he manages to fight through and use Protect on the next turn to stall things out, and let the Leech Seed do its job. After that, a Spark does about half, but Bareth fights Paralysis a second time to land a Rock Tomb that lowers Vikavolt's speed. I then switch to Osei, who can tank a resisted Spark, then Protect on the following turn. This continues to stall out enough that Vikavolt is left with what must be just a few hit points. With that, Osei can use Steel to take Vikavolt out, while absconding with his Oka Berry, leaving us with just Charge Bug. I bring in Byleth, and I don't let this last any longer than it has to. One Inferno Overdrive later, and Charger Bug is toasted to a crisp. That's another island trial completed with relative ease. With a new level cap of 33, Paimon can evolve into Meganium. Then on the way to the next island trial, I make a quick pit stop at Blush Mountain to find a Rhyhorn who I name Eligor. For the Totem Mimikyu, I go with a similar strategy I used for Vikavolt. Paimon sets up Leaf Seed, which has the added benefit of not being blocked or triggering Mimikyu's Disguise ability. Thanks to that, all we need to do is just focus on surviving as Leech Seed slowly brings it down. Haunter joins the battle on the next turn as I switch over to Malphus. Intimidate lowers their attack, and while Haunter can't connect with a Sucker Punch, a play rough from Mimikyu still manages to bring Malphus into the red. A critical hit there would have been disastrous. So I have to switch to Bareth as Haunter wastes another Sucker Punch. He can resist Mimikyu's next play rough, then Protect on the next turn to stall, bringing Mimikyu down to about half HP. I decide to go for a Smart Strike on the following turn to finally break its disguise, but then Haunter decides to use Hypnosis and put Bareth to sleep. So I decide now's the time to switch to Zagan as both Mimikyu and Haunter waste their turns failing a Mimic and Nightshade respectively. After surviving a Sucker Punch and Play Rough, Zagan proceeds to finish off Mimikyu and Haunter with a couple of super effective Shadow Claws, giving us yet another clean trial completion. We return to Tapu Village, where on a Monday we can find Agrias the Swinub, who can immediately evolve into Piloswine. Then, with a new level cap, we can get a bunch of evolutions. Malphus evolves into Staraptor, Citrine to Doublade, Zagan into Slacking, and last but not least, Byleth can finally join his Gen 2 comrades by evolving into Typhlosion. Next on Route 16, I can catch a Duosion who I name Neberos. Then in the Ula Ula Meadow, we can find Kamaris the Rosalia. She'll be our last encounter for a while, as we now enter a long stretch of multiple story battles. First up is the battle against Guzma in Po-Town, but since he still has just 2 Pokemon like before, and with Malphus fully evolved, he once again goes down easy. A couple aerial aces forces Golisopede out, and while Ariados can do some decent damage with a couple sucker punches, it just goes down with 2 more, then one final one takes care of a Golisopod. Easy peasy. And after defeating our angry edgelord rival Gladion, we can take on our 3rd Grand Trial against Nanu and his Dark types. I start with Morax taking out his Sableye with a single Play Rough after a turn of Fake Out Flinch. Then after Krokorok comes in and lowers his attack with Intimidate, I switch to Malphus in response. He intimidates back while also avoiding an Earthquake. Malphus then manages to dodge a Swagger, and then a super effective close combat nets us another one-hit KO. That leaves Nanu's Alolan Persian, who is not only fast, but it can be deceptively powerful, especially if it can get off its Black Hole Eclipse Z move. I bring back Morax hoping it goes for said Z move, but it just goes for Fake Out, then a Power Gem the next turn. A Play Rough does about 3/4, then after taking one more Power Gem, Morax can land one final Play Rough to take Persian down, winning us our 3rd Grand Trial. We immediately move on to crashing the Aether Paradise to save Lily and Nebby, and I decide to bring Eligor along, who at this point has evolved into Rhydon. My intention is that he'll be a boon for the final fight against Guzma, who has a more stacked team this time around. But it doesn't quite go down the way I want. Osei starts off with a Volt Switch to bring Golisopod into the red, forcing it out. And fun fact, apparently the effect of Volt Switch doesn't occur when it activates Emergency Exit. Let me know in the comments if that still happens in later generations. Guzma sends out Masquerain next, who dishes out a good amount of damage with a Bud Buzz. The Thunderfang brings it down to a 4th, but Osei obviously has to come out. And here I make the mistake of bringing Eligor in for his battle debut, because I forgot that rock types don't actually resist bug type attacks. And with his bottom tier special defense, he's immediately knocked down to 33 HP. So not as much of a boon as I expected. I switch gears and switch to Morax, who can take another Bug Buzz much better than his teammates, then finish it off with a priority Aqua Jet. Golisopod comes back out, and I switch to Byleth, accurately predicting he'll go for a first impression. It still does some decent damage, even when resisted, but Byleth can easily take it out the next turn with a Tri-Attack via Nature Power. And with that, Byleth levels up and finally learns Lava Plume, which is his first usable special fire attack since Ember. With the extra power, an Inferno Overdrive reaches 160 base power, and when using his better special attack, he has no trouble incinerating Guzma's Pinsir. Last is Ariados, but after a pitiful Sucker Punch, a regular Lava Plume is more than enough to take it down, proving who the top dog of Alola is. It's not you, Guzma. Sorry. Next up right away is President Lusamine, whose team is a bit trickier to deal with. With diverse typing and good move pool coverage, on top of a random AI, we have to be extra careful here. We start off strong with Bareth taking out her Clefable with a couple poison jabs after she tries to boost her defenses with Cosmic Power. Mismagius comes in next, so I switch to Morax, who can resist a Mystical Fire. Expecting to switch to using Shadow Ball, I then pivot to Zagan. Her special defense isn't her best stat, but she's still bulky enough to take a Power Gem instead, then take Mismagius out with a single Shadow Claw. Next is Beware, and I'm expecting it to go for Hammer Arm, but after switching to Morax, it instead goes for a Takedown. That gets a critical hit, leaving Morax with just 16 HP. This complicates things. I was hoping to make use of Morax a bit more, but now I have to switch him out. So I bring in Osei, but another takedown brings him below half. He can outspeed and Volt Switch out, bringing Beware below half, while bringing in Byleth next. He takes a ton of damage from a Hammer Arm, but a Lava Plume the following turn can easily take him down. Next up is Milotic, and thanks to the necessary switching, most of my teammates that can take her on are not in good shape. Barbatos is my only Mon who can tank a Hydro Pump, which still ends up doing a bit over a third. Thankfully, Milotic just sets up a Safeguard on the next turn as I go for Crunch, giving us a little reprieve. Another Hydro Pump leaves him with just 12 HP, as another Crunch just brings Milotic into the yellow. At this point, there's really no one else that can take a hit. So I switch to Zagan, but she immediately falls to another Hydro Pump. Bareth can then come in for free, and Milotic outspeeds to land another Hydro Pump, and Bareth just barely hangs on with 5 HP. With that, a Poison Jab is finally enough to take Milotic down. But we still have Lilligant to deal with. I have to keep Earthen and hope he outspeeds, but he doesn't. A Petal Dance takes him down, giving us our second loss from this fight alone. At the very least, I can bring Byleth back in, who can safely outspeed and go overkill with an Inferno Overdrive to finally end our toughest and costliest fight yet. How can I be so awful? How about some self-reflection for once in your life, Lusamine? So with all that nasty business at Aether Paradise mostly resolved, we can finally make our way to Pony Island. Off the coast of the Pony Wilds, I can find a Dusk Stone to finally evolve Citrine to Aegislash, and then I decide to use my Shiny Stone to evolve Kamaris into Roserade. I'm also able to grab the last few Island Scan encounters, Amon the Samurott, Belial the Embor, and Malthus the Superior. The problem is, as great as it is to have the 3 Unnovan starters join the team, they come a bit too late to be much use. It also doesn't help that we already have a starter trio, so their niche in terms of typing is already fulfilled too. And to prove my point, I stuffed my team full of my other water and grass types to take on our final grand trial against Hapu and air ground types. Barbatos starts off by taking out her Alolan Duck trio with a single Scald after it sets up a Sandstorm. I then switch to Malthus, who both intimidates and causes Mudsdale to completely waste its ground type Z move. I then have a Mew turn back to Barbatos, who can easily tank a double kick, Sandstorm damage, and an Earthquake, then take Mudsdale down with a couple Scalds. Flygon is next, but since this guy only knows Dragon Pulse and Earth Power, Morax can easily come in and get a one-hit KO with a Play Rough. That just leaves Gastrodon, and I finally give recently evolved Kamaris some time to shine, letting her let loose a quad-effective Leaf Storm to get another one-hit KO, and win us our 4th and final Grand Trial. And on our trek through the vast Pony Canyon, we have the final island trial against the Totem Kommo-o. But even though he gets an Omni boost at the start, this fight is actually fairly easy. While Kommo-o starts the battle with Protect, I have Paimon take the opportunity to set up Light Screen, which will hopefully dissuade it from using Clanging Scales. His ally Hakamo'o comes in, but he's essentially a non-factor due to being at such a low level. After Sky Uppercut deals about half, Paimon sets up his trusty Leech Seed. After that, I bring in Citrine to negate the next Sky Uppercut, while Hakamo'o repeatedly uses Automize, and with my Ghost-type Seatree on the field, it literally cannot do anything damage-wise. So after protecting the next turn gets some more Leech Seed damage, Citrine can then start Shadow Clawing her way through Kommo-o, which is helped along thanks to a Clanging Scales lowering its own defense. After a Shadow Sneak, one final tick of Leech Seed damage can bring it down, then Hakamo'o soon follows. And just like that, we've completed the final island trial of the run. All that's left now is the final string of endgame fights, starting with the second fight against Lusamine. This fight is close to the same as before, except for 3 things. Each of her Pokemon now have a move that can heal themselves, they each get a boost to their best stat, and they look really pissed off. But unlike the previous fight, my team's makeup is a bit better suited for this task. Her Clefable opens with a Cosmic Power to increase her defense, but an Iron Head from Citrine still does some great damage. It tries to heal with Moonlight a couple times, but the damage from her Iron Heads managed to outpace it, giving Citrine the opportunity to take it down with a Shadow Sneak before it goes for another Moonlight. Next is Miss Magius, so I switch to Malthus expecting a Shadow Ball, but it just goes for Pain Split. Being wary of a Power Gem, I go ahead and switch again, this time to Morax, but she just goes for Pain Split again. What is going on? After a third Pain Split, an Aqua Tail brings her into the red, giving Morax the opportunity to take Miss Magius down with a priority Aqua Jet the next turn. I know Lusamine's AI is a bit random, but that was still an interesting maneuver. Lilligant comes out next and gets a special attack boost, so we have to be careful of her powerful Petal Dances. I pivot to Violet, as Lilligant goes for Leech Seed. Infuriated to see the enemy use our teammate's signature move, Violet tries to use an Inferno Overdrive via Flamethrower, but Lilligant outspeeds and confuses him with a Teeter Dance, and he ends up hurting himself. Awesome. I decide to switch to Paimon, who just gets confused by another Teeter Dance. But unlike Byleth, Paimon has a good head on his shoulders, and manages to land a Body Slam, which ends up getting the paralysis. He shakes off the confusion on the next turn to land a second Body Slam, but Lilligant just keeps going for Teeter Dance. So I switch back to Byleth, who gets confused again from another Teeter Dance. Jesus. But by this time it becomes apparent that he and Lilligant actually have a speed tie, as he manages to go first and fight confusion to finally land a Flamethrower, getting us a one-hit KO. Milotic is next, so it's back to Paimon, who can resist a Hydro Pump coming in. He then manages to dodge the next Hydro Pump and set up Leech Seed, and along with Leftovers recovery, ends up nearly getting back to full health. After a couple Body Slams bringing her into the yellow, I figure it's a good time to bring in Neberos for her battle debut. Milotic heals with a Recover, but a Grass Knot ends up bringing her back below half. I was thinking that Milotic would go for a second Recover, but instead it goes for Hydro Pump, as I have Neberos go for a Calm Mind to get ahead of its healing. But because of that, Neberos has to come out earlier than I was hoping. I bring back Citri as my loader recovers twice to get back to full health. But after Shadow Claw brings her back below half and some more Leech Seed damage, a Shadow Sneak doesn't get the kill, and she recovers again. But after another Shadow Claw brings her back below half, she just goes for Safeguard. Okay, good for us, I suppose. And that just leaves Beware to deal with. After a Baby Doll Eyes, a Shadow Claw can't do much, so I switch to Malthus. A Pain Split right now actually hurts Beware, and then I decide it's time to go all out with Brave Bird. It brings Beware below half, and Malthus takes some recoil, but instead of doing anything meaningful, Beware just goes for Pain Split again. Either way, another Brave Bird brings Beware down to a fourth, and after another useless Pain Split, I have Malthus U-turn out to Morax. And after yet another Pain Split, Morax connects with a Play Rough the next turn, but it's not quite enough to put the fight away. Finally, Beware goes for something besides Pain Split, in this case Takedown. Recoil brings it down into the red, and going for a Play Rough would be a bit risky given its less than perfect accuracy. So instead, we turn it into the Z-move Twinkle Tackle, which looks ridiculous. But with that, Beware goes down, and we finally fulfilled the fantasy of teenagers dealing with their narcissistic parents, making them see the error of their ways by beating them into submission. With the main conflict wrapped up, we can finally make our way to the Pokemon League, and after taking care of our two rivals one last time, I can start making our final preparations to take on the Elite Four. I eventually narrow my final team down to those who I believe will give us the best chance to make it through. With my final team assembled, it's time to take on the toughest challenge of the run. Let's see if these summoned fighters have what it takes to become Alola's first champions. Our first opponent will be Kahili and her flying types. Violet starts with a flamethrower, bringing her Skarmory down to its sturdy, as it sets up a layer of spikes. Kahili uses her first full restore, so after another flamethrower and a tri-attack via nature power, Skarmory is first to go down. Next is Manabuzz, who is tanky enough to take on a full powered eruption pretty well. A Brave Bird does some decent damage, while the recoil brings it below half. I go for a Rock Slide, hoping for a flinch, but we don't get it, and another Brave Bird leaves us both in the red. This forces Kahili to use her second full restore, which puts us in an unideal position. I have to switch to Morax, who ends up having to tank two Brave Birds coming in, before recoil and Play Rough can finally bring it down. Crobat is next, so I switch to Citri, expecting a Poison Fang, but it ends up missing a Supersonic. It does connect with another one the following turn, causing Citri to hurt herself. She's still safe to stay in, and manages to fight Confusion to land a strong Shadow Ball. With a held Shell Bell, she can heal a bit back, revert to Shield form on the next turn thanks to King Shield, then finish Crobat off with another Shadow Ball the following turn. Toucannon is next, and while Citri is still confused, she continues to fight through to revert back to Shield form and block Toucannon's Beak Blast. I then pivot over to Osei, who gets his defense lowered by Screech, but a Gigavolt Havoc on the next turn is more than enough to take Toucannon out with a single hit. That just leaves her Oricorio, but with a Volt switched into Morax, then an Aqua Jet, Oricorio falls, giving us our first Elite Four victory. Next up is our rematch against Olivia and her Rock types. Paimon opens the fight having no issue taking out Relicanth with a single Energy Ball, then after setting up Leech Seed against Golem, along with his held leftovers and Protect, he can heal back the damage from a super effective Steamroller. After he's fully healed, another Energy Ball just barely doesn't kill, meaning Golem can get off another Steamroller before going down after some Leech Seed damage. Lycanroc comes in next and threatens with a Continental Crush, but thanks to Protect, the damage ends up being significantly reduced. After another Leech Seed, Synthesis, and Protect bring him back to nearly full HP, another Energy Ball easily takes care of Lycanroc. Next up is Carbink, but it isn't able to do much, going down easy thanks to another Leech Seed and a couple Energy Balls. That just leaves Probopass to deal with. I go for Leech Seed as usual, then Paimon gets paralyzed from a Thunder Wave. He gets fully paralyzed for the next turn, which gives Probopass the opportunity to set up a Sandstorm. Of course, Paimon's leftovers and Leech Seed's recovery basically negate the Sandstorm damage, but now the damage of his Energy Ball is severely reduced. So I switch over to Morax, who just needs to land a single Aqua Tail to take Probopass down, earning us our second Elite Four victory. Next is the rematch against Hala, and you guessed it, Paimon leads again, with yes, Leech Seed. His Hariyama does manage to bring him down below half with a close combat, but as usual, Protect, Leech Seed, and leftovers bring him back up to snuff pretty quickly. We do this again after an Energy Ball brings Hariyama below half, then a second eventually takes him out. Probably sensing the danger, Hala immediately sends out his Ace Crabominable. So I switch to Byleth, who gets hit into the yellow with an Ice Hammer, but a single Flamethrower on the next turn is all that's needed to melt him down. Next is Poliwrath, so I bring in the perfect answer in the shape of Morax, who can resist Waterfall, then get the clean KO with a Play Rough. The same goes for Primeape, and just like that, we're left with Bewear. A different Bewear has given us trouble before, but this one manages to go down easy. One Z-Power Twinkle Tackle later, and Bewear is deleted. That's Elite Four victory number 3, and 1 to go. I saved the fight against Acerola for last, as I predicted she would give my team the most trouble, and I end up being proven mostly correct. I lead with Citri using King's Shield, expecting an immediate Shadow Claw, but Sableye instead goes for a Confuse Ray. It's a little annoying, but she manages to fight through to land a Shadow Ball that barely doesn't kill. Acerola heals the next turn, and Citri fights through again to land a Shadow Sneak before snapping out of confusion and referring to Shield form with a King Shield. This time Sableye does use Shadow Claw, meaning its attack ends up getting lowered. This means its next Shadow Claw won't deal nearly as much damage before another Shadow Ball from Citri finally takes it out. Citri gets some health back thanks to her held Shell Bell, but I have to switch out as Palossand is the one to come out next. But thanks to Citri baiting Acerola into using her Ghost-type Z-move, switching to Malthus completely negates it. I then have him U-turn over to Paimon as Palossand goes for Iron Defense, then after Paimon sets up a Leech Seed, Acerola actually switches Palossand out for Frostlass, the rare AI switch. Of course, this is the best move the AI could make. Frostlass is faster than my entire team, and she can hit pretty hard with Blizzard. I protect for a turn to get some Leech Seed chip in, then switch over to Byleth, who gets confused from a Confuse Ray coming in. But I had him hold a Lumberry to clear it all up. Except she just goes for another Confuse Ray on the next turn, resulting in Byleth hurting himself. So there wasn't much point in doing that. Still, the Leech Seed is doing its job, and after taking a Shadow Ball, Frostlass goes down to a single Flamethrower. Palossand comes back in to threaten Byleth with Earth Power, so I pivot back to Malthus to dodge it. The only thing it knows that can hurt Malthus is Giga Drain, so I keep him in to land a Brave Bird that brings it into the yellow. I then use Roost to heal up the recoil, but this means that Palossand's next Giga Drain isn't resisted, so it ends up healing back more. Not wanting to drag this out, I decide to U-turn back over to Paimon, and this time Acerola keeps Palossand in, meaning an Energy Ball in the next turn can easily take it down without a fuss. Next up is Dhelmise, and I go for Protect to scout out which move it'll use. It ends up being Shadow Ball, so I go ahead and bring Malthus back in for free, as well as to Intimidate. A Brave Bird just barely doesn't KO and deals a good chunk of recoil, but thanks to a held Citrus Berry and Dhelmise missing a Slam, we aren't punished for it. After roosting back to full health as Acerola uses her other full restore, another couple of Brave Birds are enough to take it down. That just leaves Drifblim, but because its only attacking move is the Ghost-type Omnious Wind, there's literally nothing it can do to hurt Malthus. So after alternating between Brave Bird and Roost to recover the recoil, while Drifblim is resorted to doing nothing but spamming Amnesia, it finally falls, giving us our final Elite Four victory. That means we've become Alola's very first official champion, but we immediately have to face off against our first challenger of the throne, Professor Kukui. The fight begins with his Lycanroc immediately setting up Stealth Rocks, then falling to a single Sacred Sword from Citri. Snorlax is next, and after a King Shield sufficiently lowers its attack, I switch to Malthus, who takes extra Stealth Rock damage, but can lower Snorlax's attack even further with Intimidate while dodging a high horsepower. I take the opportunity to use Roost, while the Body Slam thankfully deals slightly less damage compared to what was just healed. I then go for a close combat to knock Snorlax down below half, then a second Body Slam ends up paralyzing. But Malthus is still faster, so he can fight through it to land a second close combat to take Snorlax down. Next up is Alolan Ninetales, so I bring in Byleth to take an Ice Shard. Even after Stealth Rock's damage, there's nothing Ninetales can do, especially when Byleth outspeeds and takes it out with a single Flamethrower. We're doing good so far, but having Byleth out forces Kukui to send out his Primarina, who is capable of dealing some outrageous damage. I switch to the always resourceful Paimon, who ends up surviving a Hydro Vortex. That's definitely great, but we quickly run into a problem. After stalling and healing with Synthesis, I'm forced to witness Primarina's Moonblast dealing way too much damage. We can easily stall out things with Protect and Synthesis along with Leftovers Recovery, but it doesn't leave an opening for me to sup a Leech Seed or attack with an Energy Ball without losing Paimon. With that in mind, I decide to try and stall out Primarina's Moonblast power points, but then I'm reminded that Moonblast has 15 PP. Between the PP I have left with Protect and Synthesis, and the fact that the damage from Moonblast is slowly but surely outpacing my healing, I don't see much hope in being able to get ahead. I keep at this for probably way too long before I conclude that this is just going to end up killing Paimon, who I easily consider my MVP of the run up to this point. I really don't like the idea of losing him at this stage of the game. So by the time Primarina has run out of Moonblast PP, I have also run out of Synthesis PP, and Paimon is in the red. I finally get my head on straight and bring Citri back in. She resists a Hyper Voice, then on the following turn, after a Sparkling Aria brings her below half, I can finally land an attack that barely deals over a fourth. I protect the next turn, but I am getting sick of these number games. So I take a risk and bring in Osei, who takes massive damage from another Sparkling Aria, but survives on just 22 HP. This gives him the chance to land a critical hit Volt Switch on the next turn to finally take Primarina down. But even after that ordeal, we still have two more of Kukui's Pokemon to deal with, starting with Magnezone. I bring back Citri, who gets paralyzed from the Thunder Wave, but she fights through to land a Sacred Sword that brings it below half. Thanks to her Shell Bell, she recovers to get above half HP, then returns to Shield form with a King Shield. This means that she can survive a Thunderbolt one more time, but then she gets fully paralyzed, leaving her unable to defeat Magnezone on her own. Our good luck with paralysis ran out, and not at the best time. The team is starting to look worn down, and my healthy teammates can't come in safely. So, I make the decision to keep Citri in. She can at least get off a Shadow Sneak for a bit of damage, but after another Thunderbolt, she goes down. But with her sacrifice, I can bring Byleth in safely. He melts down Magnezone with a Flamethrower on the next turn, and with that, we're finally down to Kukui's final Pokemon, Braviary. With most of my remaining Pokemon at half or less HP, there's not much advantage in switching and giving Braviary more chances to deal damage. So again, I keep Byleth in to connect with a strong Flamethrower before a Brave Bird takes him down as well. I bring Morax in next, expecting to finish this fight with one final Aqua Tail, but then Kukui uses a full restore. And to make matters worse, Morax's Aqua Tail ends up missing. The next one does connect and gets a critical hit to bring it below half again, but then Braviary uses Whirlwind. And with Stealth Rocks on the field, we're now in a very dangerous position. Thankfully, he pulls in Malphus, who is vulnerable to the Stealth Rocks, but he has enough HP to survive coming in. He can also intimidate and lower Braviary's attack, hopefully giving us some breathing room. The problem is, he is still paralyzed, and there's nothing else he can do. So, I keep him in, and he quickly falls to a Brave Bird. I'm now down to just 3 of my final team members, and since 2 are at critical health, it's up to Morax again to finally put this battle away. He comes in, and this time I make a much smarter move. I activate his held Fighting Z Crystal that turns his superpower into an all-out pummeling to ensure that Braviary finally goes down. With that, Professor Kukui is defeated, I've defended my crown, and I have officially beaten Pokemon Sun using only Island Scan Pokemon. This one was definitely a wild ride, especially towards the end there. I'll admit that I was kinda dragging my heels on doing a run of a 7th generation game. I was dreading having to deal with the totem fights along with trainers with actual EV trained Pokemon, but switching up by only using Island Scan provided a fun and somewhat unique experience that gave me a bit more appreciation for the Alolan games. So, expect more to come in the future. And as I mentioned briefly towards the end, this run's MVP is without a doubt Paimon the Meganium. Thanks to his decent bulk and Chikorita coming with Leech Seed, Paimon definitely leveled the playing field in certain fights, especially against the Totem Pokemon. Don't disregard what is often considered one of the worst starters in the franchise. With Leech Seed, Protect, Synthesis, and Held Leftovers, you have an almost unkillable tank that will likely take you to the very end. So, if you enjoyed watching endless Leech Seeds falling from the sky, or just this run in general, please don't hesitate to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.